Welcome, everyone. I am Nanda W. Kerr, Chair of Events for the Mindfulness and Wellbeing in Law Committee. We are grateful to have Sharon Salzberg today, who will be interviewed by Cecilia B. Levin, the Chair of the committee. Before introducing our presenters for today, I'd like to acknowledge our co-sponsoring association committees, the Alternate Dispute Resolution Committee, chaired by Charles Newman, the Government Ethics and State Affairs Committee, chaired by Jennifer Rogers, the Mental Health Law, chaired by Karen Simmons, as well as our co-sponsoring organization, the Lawyers Assistant Program, directed by Eileen Travis, and the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, directed by Deborah Martin Owens. Thank you all for your support. Just to give you some background on our presenters today, I would like to introduce them. Sharon Salzberg is a pioneer in the field of meditation, a world-renowned teacher and best-selling author. Sharon has played a pivotal role in bringing meditation and mindfulness into mainstream American culture since 1974. She is a co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, and an author of 12 books, including the New York Times bestseller, Real Happiness, Loving Kindness, and Real Love, The Art of Mindful Connection. Sharon is also the host of her own podcast, The Metta Hour, with more than 90 episodes featuring interviews with the top leaders and voices in the meditation and mindfulness movement. Please visit SharonSalzberg.com to learn more about Sharon's work. Today, Cecilia Levin will be discussing Sharon's latest book with her Real Change, Mindfulness to Heal Ourselves and the World. Cecilia B. Levin is Deputy Commissioner and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer of the New York City Fire Department. She is a creator of Mindful Mondays and the recipient of a 2020 Diversity and Inclusion Champion Award for the City Bar, which will be awarded this Thursday, October 8th. Congratulations, Commissioner Levin. Without any further delay, we'll start our program.
Thank you so much, Nander. I am so incredibly grateful today to talk to Sharon Salzberg. We've really been looking forward to this for a while, and we're going to talk to Sharon about her new book, Real Change, Mindfulness to Heal Ourselves and the World. And what better topic is there for us to talk about now? And Sharon, I know we talked about this during the spring, and I couldn't wait for your book to come out because we can really use the wisdom of your teachings to bring about the change that we so desperately need. And I love the way you put this in the book. You say that we need these practices to ease suffering and to connect further, so that we're not defined by by isolation and fear, but rather by wisdom, generosity, and love. And so I am also grateful to start our conversation with you leading a mindfulness practice. And this one, as you know, is taken from your book, and you call it Gathering Our Energy. Can you just tell us a little bit about the practice and lead us through one?
Sure, I would be happy to. And first, let me add my congratulations.
Thank you.
It's nice to be together just in this moment in time, especially as this is happening for you. And the premise of this particular meditation exercise is that for many of us, we find ourselves somewhat scattered or distracted, not perhaps in every arena of life, but in different places in our lives where so much of our attention, so much of our energy, therefore, goes to the past, but not in a useful way, which would also be a possibility, more in a way of just ruminating, perhaps over things we didn't do in a way that we really feel satisfied with, or we now have some regret about, and we just go over it and over it and over it and over it. And I'd say in times like these, especially, and our minds leap into the future and we create a scenario that has not happened and may never happen. And we feel a lot of anxiety about that. So, between all of that, we feel disempowered. And the practice is a very foundational practice of basically gathering our energy and arriving. And the ultimate goal is a greater steadiness, not that we never think about the past or the future, but this sort of endless gyration, which is not serving us, doesn't have to be prolonged. And we can actually learn to come back and settle and get a much stronger sense of centeredness and stability in our attention. So, if you'd like to sit comfortably, you can close your eyes or not, wherever you feel most at ease. And we basically do this practice by choosing what we call a primary object. That's the home base for our minds. And I'm going to suggest that we use something like the feeling of the breath, the actual sensations of the in and out breath, as that primary object. And in this system, it's just the normal, natural breath. You don't have to make it deeper or different. So if you can find the place where the breath is strongest for you or clearest for you, maybe that's the nostrils or the chest or the abdomen, bring your attention there and just rest. See if you can feel one breath. Without concern for what's already gone by, without leaning forward for even the very next breath, just this one. And simply feel it. Early in my own practice, I was so kind of hypervigilant that I realized it was hard for me to be with just this one breath, because as soon as it was appearing, I was kind of mentally leaning forward to get ready for the next 50. So I'd say to myself, settle back. Let the breath come to you. I'd also say to myself, you're breathing anyway. All you need to do is feel it. Because I had so much performance anxiety. It's like I'd never done it before. Settle back. Let the breath come to you. You're breathing anyway. All you need to do is feel it. And if images or sounds or sensations or emotions should arise, but they're not very strong, if you can stay connected to the feeling of the breath, just let them flow on by. You're breathing. It's just one breath. They can come and go. You don't have to follow after them. You don't have to fight them. But if something arises that is very strong, it pulls you away. You get lost in thought, spun out in a fantasy, or you fall asleep. Truly, don't worry about it. We say the most important moment in the whole process is the next moment after you've been gone. It's the process of letting go gently and returning to begin again, bringing your attention back to the feeling of the breath. If you have to let go and begin again countless times in the next minute or so, it's fine. when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the meditation.
Thank you so much. I had just a wonderful moment of total peace,
Mm.
and I'm so grateful for that. Uh, and I always appreciate the energy of love in your books, which is what I believe we're all here to give. And it's really interesting that Real Change is a book that you've been wanting to write for years, to explore the intersection between the activity of working towards change and the clarity and the compassion arising from mindfulness and loving kindness, because it couldn't have been a better time to write the book. And so I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about your journey to the mindfulness space and all of the great teachings that you provide, and how that led to the journey of writing Real Change.
Sure. I went to college when I was 16 years old as a product of the New York City public school system, which tended to have people skip grades. And when I was 17, when I was a sophomore, I took an Asian philosophy course in college. There was a philosophy requirement, and I just almost randomly chose that one. And it was a very profound experience for me. Like for many people, I'd had a very traumatic, disrupted childhood, a very chaotic, a lot of loss. And like for many people, mine was a family system where this was never ever really spoken about. And it was in the context of that class that I heard that there were practices that were actually direct practical tools one might use called meditation that could help you be a lot happier. And I think if I was going to describe myself at that age in one word, it would be fragmented. And somehow I just had this wild instinct that if I could learn how to meditate, I could actually kind of weave myself together and be happier. So I was going to college in Buffalo, New York. I looked around Buffalo, didn't see it anywhere. I created an independent study project for the university saying I want to go to India and study meditation. And this was 1970, and they said yes. So off I went in the fall of 1970. And I had a very particular kind of desire, which were those practical, um, direct tools. I wanted the how to. I wasn't particularly fascinated with the philosophy or um, doing a comparison. I didn't want a new identity, and I didn't want to reject anything else. But I really wanted to learn how to. And I was fortunate enough in India to come upon teachers who really were about that, so that it wasn't about dogma, it wasn't really about a belief system. It was about the power of one's own awareness and how to harness it and how to refine it, so that it's more inclusive, it's more present, it's more flexible. And sure enough, I got a lot happier. I did, because sometimes people ask, I did go back to Buffalo and was there a little bit of time. I managed to get 2 years of independent study credit instead of one. And then I went back to India. So I did graduate, actually. And I left India in 1974 as a meditation teacher because my own teacher had told me to teach. And so in 1974, as one of my friends put it way before it was cool, I was here teaching meditation. And that's both mindfulness meditation, really cultivating that power of awareness, and loving kindness meditation, which is really about using our attention differently. So, for example, we might wish well to somebody we usually ignore or look through just from indifference. And instead of the indifference, we actually bring them to mind and wish them well and see what happens with that. So I have written, as you said, any number of books before this one. I think that one of the main reasons I wanted to work on real change was because all of our early teaching in this country was just open, whoever appeared. And interestingly enough, the first time I think a particular group of people with a particular livelihood wanted to learn was attorneys. Um, and so we did these programs like at Yale Law School, and we did these programs for different law firms. But for the most part, it would just be, say, an open workshop or retreat. And whoever showed up, showed up. In more recent years, I've spent a fair amount of time working with caregivers. I always think there should be a better word than that, perhaps. There is, I don't know what it is yet, but either people in their personal life who are in that role, taking care of somebody else, or in their professional life. Domestic violence shelter workers, international humanitarian aid workers, these days, frontline medical personnel, people who are really on the front lines of suffering in one way or another in the society and trying to make a difference. And I realized that they had something very much in common with what we call activists or people who are trying to do systems change, um, with educators, with all kinds of people who are incredibly caring. They actually don't lack empathy at all, uh, but are burning out for all kinds of other reasons. And I wondered if the tools that had helped sustain me so much, mindfulness and loving kindness, could be a factor. And that was the experiment we were making with caregivers. And it seemed to be something that could be quite helpful. And then on the other side, I, of course, know quite a number of meditators who maybe do want to make a difference in this world and they're not sure how. Our efforts can seem so meager and not enough. And they don't exactly know how to take that step, even if it seems small. And I wanted to encourage them as well.
Thank you. As a lawyer, I know that the meditation and mindfulness has certainly been very important in my career, really throughout my career, and also working with first responders at the FDNY. We have our mindfulness group and incorporate these practices. And I find that there is sometimes a challenge to convince those who are activists, who are advocates for change. Being in this space of diversity and inclusion is somewhat difficult because people don't see the connection between making the change and the mindfulness and how it centers you and gives you an incredible amount of energy to be focused and clear and to innovate. And so I just want to talk a little bit about how meditation, I love the quote that you have in your book that I have posted here, is it's not a salve, but it does provide the impetus for change. And so can we just talk a little bit about that and what you've discovered in writing your book about how meditation supports activism?
Well, I think of meditation largely as a skills training, and every one of those skills can make a difference. It does make a difference in how we live. And whether you're talking about relating differently to yourself or your family or your community or to work, in a larger sense, I think it can be really supportive. So the first skill is a little bit of what we just did. It's like centering ourselves, having a place of rest, which is not inconsiderable, in terms of a need. It's like we go and go and go and go. And I think what actually happens is that if we can just stop now and then and just rest, we are restored and then we have more energy to go forward with. But it's hard to do. It feels selfish or wrong, but actually it's an experiment. And that's usually how uh, going back to your earliest point, that's usually how I describe it to people. It's just an experiment. And if you want to make the experiment, you decide for yourself if it's useful or not. But that's the first thing is we gather our energy, we center, we get that place of rest, which is very important. And mindfulness itself is an ability to be with whatever arises in a different way. So there are lots of feelings like anger, fear. We might not like in ourselves, and so we add a lot of stuff, shame and dread and judgment and projection into the future, like this is the only thing I'll ever feel, and a sense of isolation. I'm the only one who ever feels this. And we learn how to be with the authenticity of what we're feeling, let's say with these painful feelings, in a way that helps us from keep us from adding all that stuff. So that's where the place of insight or learning can take place. I often describe myself, for example, sitting in meditation with my own fear. And the first thing we do is we kind of pivot so that instead of being as obsessed as we usually are with the circumstance, the situation, we turn our attention to the feeling itself. Like, what is this? What does fear feel like in my body? What are the sensations? And then we look in a way at the movie of the feeling. Usually these feelings are very complex. There's a lot within of other feelings, maybe sadness, maybe anger, all kinds of things. And it's in that relationship that the insight can arise. So I have seen, for example, for myself, that unlike the world's pronouncement that we're afraid of the unknown, which of course is also true, I'm really afraid when I think I do know. And it's all the stories I tell myself about how bad it's going to be. That's when I really get going. I'll never get back to New York. I'm going to get back to my apartment. I'm going to turn in the water. I'm going to get Legionnaire's disease. I don't know. They said you can get Legionnaire's disease, right? And even in the midst of that kind of arc of anxiety, if I remind myself, you know what? You don't know. Then there's space. Space doesn't mean avoidance or disdain. It means space. And in that space, options may arise, clarity may arise, the next step may arise. And so that's an important insight for me, because it doesn't only happen, that pattern doesn't only happen when I'm sitting in meditation. So now I have some wisdom about my own way of being. And so we get to be with those experiences differently, and it's useful. And then we also
Mm.
get to be with beautiful, wonderful, lovely experiences differently, because especially like in a time like this, there's so much distress, our own and others. You can almost feel guilty about enjoying something, or having a moment's break, and or we're so distracted we don't even notice the beautiful things that are also here, a child's smile or a friend reaching out or whatever it might be. I'm sitting here looking at the autumn leaves through my window. Um, and so it's not selfish. It's part of that idea of restoring ourselves, because that's how we have the energy to face adversity, not through just being depleted and only seeing bleakness everywhere. So mindfulness really helps us do that too, like turn to that. And that takes intentionality, because that's, for most of us, that's not where our minds are going to go automatically. We have to say, let me look at this. What's the good that happened today? Something like that.
Yes, it's being comfortable walking into the unknown or just not knowing. And it is that peace and that comfort that gives us the ability to connect in a whole different way as well. And in Real Change, you talk about some of the alienation that has come up in the past rather than the interconnection, and that hatred sometimes feels like it's surging. We have been seeing a lot of protests, but also a lot of great support, and just seeing a shift and a change in the world around us. Can you talk a little bit about that in the context of mindfulness and a loving kindness practice, and how it helps us create a firmer foundation?
Well, most of the time, I think these days, mindfulness, or a lot of the time, it's taught in terms of one of the great benefits it can bring us, which is really a sense of living our lives more fully. You know, if we're drinking that cup of tea and for once we're not multitasking, we will actually taste the tea and smell the tea, and it'll be a much more fulfilling experience. If we're talking to a colleague and we're actually listening, we will have the chance to connect genuinely and may find them rather more interesting than we had assumed before, or whatever it is. So these are important benefits for living our lives. The classical benefit of mindfulness, more than anything, is insight or wisdom. And it's the kind of insight I was just talking about, which is very personal, but it's also more universal insights just into the nature of life. You know, for all we may tell ourselves we understand everything is changing all of the time, there's something about that embodied experience of it that has us make different choices, perhaps, or let go a little more easily. And one of the great insights that comes from meditation practice or from mindfulness is about interconnection, which I always thought was kind of weird, you know, because you may think meditation is like the most solitary activity possible. You might be doing it all alone. Maybe your eyes are closed. But somehow, just through paying attention, we come to understand so deeply how our lives are intertwined, how we are truly interdependent. And somebody just sent me a quotation of me from about 10 years ago, which is always an interesting experience. And what I've been saying, you know, all these years, because I still say it, is that it isn't just a meditative experience that shows us we're all interconnected. All these other aspects of life, science shows us this, economics shows us this, environmental consciousness certainly shows us this. That what happens over there doesn't nicely stay over there. It filters out over here. And what we do, where we put our energy, what we dedicate it to, it matters because it too will filter out. So that in that sense, and have for like 10 years with epidemiology shows us this. Because I have friends who are epidemiologists. They were very involved in the smallpox campaign in India years ago. So I was always interested in it or just talking about it. And for years, people would say to me, "What's that?" Or "Why are you talking about that?" Or "What does that mean?" Or and here we are, right? Where epidemiology is showing us some of the more, you could say, more terrible faces of interconnection. But it doesn't matter how we feel about interconnection because it's the truth of how things are. It's just reality. And the closer our behavior, our values, our commitments reflect reality, the better off we are. And it's when we are in some distortion, you know, trying to insist things don't change or insist we can hold on successfully or insist that the construct of self and other and us and them is other than a construct and that uh, the we does not really exist. We're just lost. And all of our actions reflect that and just cause so much difficulty for ourselves and for others. So interconnection is the truth of things. And I think we do live in a time where um, it's harder to trust that, or it's even harder to find that somehow. Somebody, Robert Putnam, I think his name was, wrote this great book some years ago called Bowling Alone, about the dissolution of bowling leagues. And it was a commentary on how so many of the places in this society where we used to come together are not so either not really happening so much anymore, they're not so prevalent, or they're not so stable. And so we have to find other ways of coming together.
And it's that the creativity I find that's involved now in trying to make those connections um, through Zoom, like we're doing now, through so many creative ways, which is one of the reasons why I love the story that you share about the subway in real change, and using that almost as a metaphor for the connections that we make in the flesh, but now we also make in the spirit, we make in the mind, and how we relate to each other. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. This was an image that my friend Bob Thurman, who was a professor of Buddhist studies at Columbia University, he just retired recently. He used it a tremendous amount in his teaching, and upon occasion we would teach together. Um, and it was basically say you're in a subway car, and let's say a crowded subway car pre-pandemic, and these Martians come and they zap the subway car so that those of you who are in there are going to be together forever. So what do? If somebody's hungry, you feed them. Somebody's freaking out, you try to calm them down. Not because you necessarily like them or approve of them, but because you're going to be together forever. Well, guess what? There's a lot of truth in that. You think about this planet, you think about anything really, and how we can have such a sense of isolation that's simply untrue. And it's corrosive for ourselves, it's bad for our health, and it's bad in terms of our actions and the ways we ignore the we-ness of life, which is very true. Like I tell a story in the book about being driving with a friend, and we were stuck in this incredible, terrible, awful traffic, complaining about it the whole while. And then my friend turned to me and said, "Well, we're the traffic too, you know." And I thought, "Oh, that's so interesting." Like, it's such an interesting feeling. Like, they talk about privilege. Like, I own the road, it's my road. You are an interloper slowing me down, and then realizing, oh, we're the traffic too. It's like that sense of I'm in the center of existence and you're just on the margins in my way. The centeredness as an exclusive perspective just dropped. And here we were. We're all the traffic. What are we going to do about this mess? Right? We have to do something. But it's very different than like I own the road and you're in my way. And so just that one vision of life can make a very big difference.
Thank you for that. Just a reminder of what those barriers, artificial barriers that we tend to put up between sort of us and them when we're all one, in whatever messiness is created, whatever traffic jams there are. One of the other images that you share is the fluidity of water. And I was hoping that you could share a little bit about that and how that assists in your mindfulness practice.
I think that was also part of my journey and our journey toward insight because I think with any kind of introspection of whatever form, and we may choose different forms, but for me, it was certainly in the form of meditation. You just see so much. You know, it's not really about just getting placid or kind of calmer. There's so much that you see and so much that's revealed, and we see like a lot of the myths and um, beliefs that may have been instilled in us through family, through culture, whatever it might be. And we get to examine them. Like, is this actually true? It's not to dismiss them out of hand, but is this really true? And, you know, does vengefulness, for example, or resentment, does resentment actually make me happy? Because so much of the time, things like resentment are portrayed as strength. You know, you're not going to let anyone take advantage of you. You're going to carry that grudge forever or whatever. And certainly, I think that was true in my family. Like that was strength, but you actually look at it and you see, oh, it's really kind of brittle and contracted and therefore breakable. You know, it's not actually that strong. And qualities like compassion, many people are taught, well, that's for suckers. You know, like that's just going to leave you too vulnerable and you're going to care too much. And it's, um, you know, or generosity is not a smart idea and it's really a dog eat dog world or whatever, you know, and you just get to see these things how alone are we really? And who am I really? But especially, in this context, like what brings us happiness? What is really strength? And what just leaves us kind of alone and afraid and so on. And so water for me is an extremely powerful image of kind of the fluidity of states like loving kindness or compassion. On the face of it, we can think they're sentimental or they're kind of saccharine. They don't have real power, but they have tremendous power because they too reflect the truth of interconnection. But it's not a kind of unmoving power. It's not something that's just solid and reified that way. And I love the sense that water, it'll get those rocks in the end. It may take a few millennia, but we think of it as like the weakest thing of all, but it actually can wear away rock. And so I think that the power of those heartful qualities or kindness itself, um, we can have a fairly contemptuous attitude in society about being kind, but I think when we actually look at it, it's one of the most uplifting and elevating qualities of all.
Mm. You're bringing to mind Langston Hughes, my soul has grown deep like the rivers. And one of the things that comes up in New York City in the context of water is one of your favorite people, and that is Lady Liberty, and how she sits there in our waters welcoming all. And so we can't have a conversation without talking about her. And I realized in reading Real Change that the focus is not merely on her crown, but also on her movement, on her step. And so, if you could just share with us a little bit about that and how that connects with agency and cultivating a sense of hope.
Well, I've always loved the Statue of Liberty, that message of welcome and inclusion, and you too could have a home here, even though nobody else wants you, like miserable you. But here, I want you. I can provide that sense of welcome for you, and it's always been, just from my childhood, it's just been the most meaningful thing. And it was actually only working on this book that I remembered that she's a woman on the move. She has that leg up, just like in the slide. And it's about action. It's not a passive welcome, even. It's about taking a step. And that's what I referred to as agency, because we can care so much and not know what to do. Problems seem insurmountable, and systems are so vast and seem intractable. And what seems crucial is that we take the one step we can. It doesn't matter if it's not grand or magnificent, but it is the expression of our commitment to goodness or caring, and we need to take the step. That's how everything happens. And it's hard, partly because of that sense of it could never be enough, partly because we may need a greater sense of community so that we don't feel so alone in what we're doing. But it's bringing something to life. And I actually often think of, back to our earlier conversation, I think about that moment when I was in Buffalo in college and hearing about meditation. And I looked around Buffalo, I didn't find anything where I could actually learn how to meditate. And it would have been such an easy moment just to say, I think I'll read a few more books about it, or maybe I'll look for a graduate school program in a couple of years, or maybe I'll study comparative religion. But that moment of saying, I've got to breathe life into this, I've got to see what I can make real. It was an amazing moment. I was, at that point, I was 17 years old. Um, I grew up in New York City. I went to school in Buffalo. I'd never even been to California. And I was like, I'm going to go to India. There's something about that sense of moving right into the center of possibility and just seeing. taking that step that is so important for us.
Thank you. I love that, moving right into the center of possibility and the reminder that one step leads to an incredible journey, which really moved you right into your calling and purpose. And gratefully so, because you are helping teach us, all of us, regardless of what path we're on, as lawyers, as jurists, as law students, as advocates, as activists, how we can use the energy and the awakening of the fire within us, and using that, coupled with mindfulness, coupled with the tools that you share, in order to turn it into courage, to utilize it to be more generous with ourselves. Can you just share a little bit about that as well?
Many of these emotions, as I said, are so complex, and often within them, um, there is something important for us. On the other hand, if we get lost in them, immersed in them, I'm not talking about just feeling them, but if they really start defining us, then not only are we not capturing that positive aspect, but they may be damaging us in other ways. And so anger is a good example of that. Many people are woken up by a state of anger out of complacency, out of just letting things go by. And I think we all know that we might be in a meeting, for example, and it's the really angry person in the room who's insisting that everyone looks at that flaw, that looks at that problem, and the rest of us are just kind of studiously looking the other way. We'd really rather avoid it. They're saying, no, look at that. So we count on that energy a lot. And so there's a kind of cutting through quality to it, cutting through social niceties, cutting through conventional understandings. But if we are lost in anger, if we're overcome by anger, if we are defined by anger, then not only is it harmful to us, but it also gives us a kind of tunnel vision. Like if you think about the last time you were really, really angry at yourself, it's not a time when you likely thought, well, I did 5 great things that same morning. I said that stupid thing in the meeting. It's like those 5 great things, they're gone. We lose perspective. We lose a sense of options. We feel locked in. And it is, damaging in the way that in Eastern psychology, they liken anger. And I don't mean feeling anger, I mean being lost in anger. They liken it to a forest fire, which burns up its own support, which means it can destroy the host. And when I was writing Real Change, I had the thought, I really want to use that quote from Gandhi, where he said something like, if you are lost in anger, it's like drinking poison thinking it's going to kill the other guy. So I looked it up because I had to source it to put it in the book, and I never once saw it attributed to Gandhi. I saw it attributed to the Buddha and Oprah Winfrey and the Big Book of AA and Carrie Fisher and Nelson Mandela. I don't know. I have no idea who said it, but it's so true that I think it's important to bear in mind.
Yes, I always use that quote for forgiveness, in trying to establish that it's not for the other person, but it's really just for us. And also, what we give our attention to is really what begins to make us who we are. And so we do have to have that balance, which you also talk about. And part of that balance is building up just that core strength of resilience. And so, what are some of the ways that we can do that?
I think that I always think of the stress dynamic, which is a dynamic. There's the pressure, the incident, the um, situation, and then there's the resource with which it's met. It's a dynamic. And so the resource in my mind is largely inner strength, which you can cultivate, and a sense of community, not being so alone in facing adversity. And so, here on your wonderful slider, just different suggestions. For me, of course, that sense of inner strength has come largely from my practice of meditation. It really fosters it. The more mindful I am, the more balanced I am, the more compassionate I am toward myself and toward others. I find I meet situations in a very, very different way. And it's very important not to feel so alone. And also to remember to take in the joy that it's not wrong, it's not selfish, that it will really support us.
One of the other things that I was really grateful to see in Real Change as a tool is something that I use all the time. And that's the Native American tradition of healing circles, which are important for building community, for healing harm, for telling our stories, and creating a safe space to have that deeper understanding. And I just would love to hear what you like to lift up from the book or just from your life experience about the work with this particular tool, which I tend to use all the time for our courageous conversations around racial healing and racial inclusion.
Yes, I know that you use it all the time, and you wrote that wonderful book, and I think it's a fantastic tool, and I'm so glad that you have made such a point of bringing it forth. Um, I think the kinds of things that I've seen that I've used that are so powerful all involve listening in some way, rather than being self preoccupied as someone is speaking. Like, what am I going to say? How can I look witty? Something like that. It's a very deep act of listening and taking in to the best of our ability what someone else is presenting. And so, using fish bowls has been very powerful, where people maybe talk in the circle, or you want to leave, you leave, and um, but it's all based on that ability uh, to not be sort of creative in a very full way.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could repeat that again because you're freezing a little bit on the frame.
Okay. Um, I was saying that I think that between using like the talking stick, or what I've also seen done is the fishbowl, where a group of people will be sitting in a circle and speaking, and everyone else will be listening. And then if somebody wants to move out, they move out. Somebody wants to move in, they move in. But the heart essence of all those practices is an ability to listen, to truly listen to one another.
Thank you. Um, I want to also, as we are nearing the end, we have about 10 more minutes left. And I want to spend some time talking about balance before we do the closing practice. And one of the great points that you make about balance, which I never thought of until I read Real Change, is about how it's not really a measurement of what we do, but it's also connected to why we are doing what we do, to that sense of purpose. And so, can you just share some insight with regard to balance and what we can do in order to improve that sense of balance in our lives?
Well, balance is a word that I never really liked very much. I used to equate it with mediocrity, um, and of course, it's not that at all. I think there are several ways of understanding it. One is really the sense of spaciousness. It's like a mind and heart that are big enough to hold it all, to have an ability to hold the joy and the sorrow and our vision of how things we believe could be, and the reality, which may be quite far from that, to hold them both and to see the validity in everything that we feel and everything we're going through. without being submerged in any one aspect. So, my current real reflection on balance, which we might call equanimity, which is also a little bit of an unusual word for casual conversation, but it means balance. Came from I had gone to Parkland, Florida, not too long after the school shooting, and I was doing a workshop for people who've been affected by it. And there was one young woman who's also in my book. Um, there, her mother is a teacher at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Um, the young woman's name is Samantha. She's an alum. Her mother was there that day but wasn't harmed. But Samantha got very involved in community efforts, uh, both toward healing and toward protesting and so on. And um, when I was doing this workshop, Samantha raised her hand and she said, I feel really weird about being here because it's like an incredible experience. And I feel so lucky to hear about mindfulness and to be with you. And yet, I know the only reason it's happening is what horrible thing happened. And I don't know how to get over it in order to really enjoy this. And I said, I don't know that we ever get over it so much as we learn to hold them both at once. And we can call that equanimity. We talked about the yin yang symbol, where in the middle of the light part, there is darkness implicit, and the middle of the light part, in the middle of the dark part, there's light implicit. And so years have gone by, a couple of years, and with the book launch for this book, I had some panels that are now up on YouTube, and one of them was from people from Parkland, and Samantha was on the panel. So I said, "Hey, do you remember that conversation we had a couple of years ago?" And she said, "Not only do I remember it, I think of it every day. That in the middle of the brightness, there could be darkness. In the middle of the dark, there's also light implicit." And she said, "My work is really to hold them both at once." And that, I think, is very much what equanimity or balance can give us, so that um, our attention is so spacious and so inclusive in a way that we can move forward because we have such a we're not avoiding anything, and we have such a full sense of what is also true in life, and that is what gives us some sense of peace.
That is so incredibly powerful and beautiful. It brings tears to my eyes. And we could end on that note. But to me, you don't have a conversation with Sharon Salzberg and not uh, use the ultimate tool, which to me is a meta and loving kindness meditation. And so we would be so grateful if you would lead us in a practice. The only thing that's coming up in the Q&A, Sharon, is praise. So I think we're good to go with a practice.
Fabulous. I'm just turning on my phone because I don't have any vision of the time. Since you've taken over my screen, I have no, but now I do. Um, okay. I didn't want you all to sit for like an hour and a half. Okay, so that's wonderful. Let's sit together. And again, you can close your eyes or not, wherever you feel most at ease. And in this style of practice, rather than resting our attention on the feeling of the breath, we rest our attention on the silent repetition of certain phrases. These phrases are like an offering to ourselves and to others. Common phrases are things like, may I be safe? May I have mental happiness? May I have physical happiness? May I live with ease? May I be safe? May I have mental happiness. May I have physical happiness. May I live with ease. And people often say to me, well, who am I asking? Well, we're not really asking. We're gift giving. We're offering. We are the first recipient. You can use these phrases or any phrases that make sense to you and just gather all of your attention behind one phrase at a time. You don't have to try to force any special feeling. It's the gathering that is the source of power here. And when your attention slips off, don't worry about it. It's the same process. See if you can gently let go. And in this case, come back to the phrases. May I be safe. May I have mental happiness. May I have physical happiness. May I live with ease. And then call to mind someone who's helped you or who inspires you. Maybe you've never met them, but they've inspired you from afar. And if someone like that comes to mind, bring them here. You can say their name to yourself, get a feeling for them, maybe an image of them, and offer the phrases of loving kindness to them. May you be safe. May you have mental happiness. May you have physical happiness. May you live with ease. And we're going to close with a gathering, just whoever comes to mind, friends, family, colleagues, puppies, and offer loving kindness to this collective. May you be safe. May you have mental happiness. May you have physical happiness. May you live with ease. So thank you.
Thank you. I was just admiring the cover of your book, and in the center, it appears to be a tunnel of some sort, but in the center, I see the sun and I see the light. I see the hope, really for all of us. And you're just such an incredible symbol and energy and teacher and inspirer and motivator and encourager of that hope in all that you do. And we are just so incredibly grateful for you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sharon and Commissioner Lovin, for your conversation this morning on Real Change, mindfulness to heal ourselves and the world. Before announcing our upcoming Mindful Mondays program, We would like to invite all participants to take a 20 minutes break on every Friday from 1:30 to 1:50 p.m. to join our weekly mindfulness break. We have wonderful presenters lined up for the rest of the month. The next webinar in the Mindful Monday series will be the upside of stress for lawyers with Sheila Azza and Dr. Priyankar Upadhyaya on Monday, November 2nd from 11 a.m. to 12 noon. With that, we conclude our today webinar. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.